Hi, my name is Danielle Sasser, and I was assigned the topic, the death of Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was born January 8, 1935, and died August 16, 1977. He was known for his musical career and later became known as one of the biggest names in rock and roll. He was influential in many people's lives. Even after his death, he still lives on. Despite all his successes, Elvis ended up dying of heart failure due to his addiction of prescription drugs, specifically opioids. It was first reported that he had heart problems and possibly died due to a heart attack. There was much speculation of what really happened during his death, even with the autopsy. The initial stories that were shared by the newspapers most likely had fact errors due to uncertainty of what really happened. According to a book written 14 years after his death, it was revealed that he was addicted to prescription drugs, and for some reason, this was covered up in the autopsy at the time of his death. The initial articles only reveal what they know from the autopsy reports, and all of them show cause of death as cardiac arrhythmia. The first source I analyzed was from the New York Times. It was published the day after his death, and it was front page of the paper. It summarized what he died from and a little background on who he was. The other section talked about his early history with hypertension and the background on his early life. Toward the end of the article, it was mentioned that radio stations across the country paid tribute to Elvis by playing his beloved music. This particular article was written with fans in mind. It had a biographical feel to the article, so the reader could get a sense of who he was throughout his life. The death of Elvis Presley had an obvious impact on his fans, especially because he died at the young age of 42. This article was respectfully written and painted Elvis in a good light. On the same day, a local paper in Memphis was published with the title, Death Captures Crown of Rock and Roll, Elvis Dies, apparently after heart attack. This was on the front page of the newspaper, and rightfully so. He lived in Tennessee, so there was also a section on the inside of the paper with colored photographs of him. Since Elvis Presley also had a movie career, the Los Angeles Times also published a story on the same day. What was interesting about this article was that the story made the front page, but it wasn't the headline of the article. However, the paper did have 3 huge pictures on the front page under the headline. And that really draws attention to the article, and without the pictures, it could have easily been overlooked. It was different. This article was different from the other 2 because it seemed strictly informational on his death, and it didn't really go into any aspect of his personal life. I wouldn't classify the story as negative, but it didn't praise his life like the others did. Personally, I see this article portrayed as your typical news story. It gives the reader the facts and doesn't include any detail that are irrelevant to the reader. Another story was published by the New York Times the day after his death. And this story made the front page right next to the initial article and talked about his death. This particular article was more on his career and the way he influenced music rather than how he died. Elvis was a legacy in music, and his death was a big deal. The author of this article wrote about how he was rock and roll to most people, and people could argue that he had his own style and put an interesting twist on music that people loved. This article was written for people who loved Elvis Presley and wanted to reminisce on his career throughout the years. I think it was important for the New York Times to include this editorial article like this, as well as what actually happened, because it emphasizes how his death shaped the media at the time and the music world. This death was a big deal for 2 reasons. It was sudden, and he had such an influence on the music industry. I also analyzed a live news segment on his death, and the story goes into cause of death saying it was an extremely irregular heartbeat, and then the news anchor says the medical examiner said that the exact cause may never be known, but drugs were not the cause. We now know that drugs played a part in his death. The news segment didn't go into a lot of detail in terms of death, but provided just enough information. This could have also been that that's the only information that they knew at the time. Other articles go into detail about how people are mourning the loss of Elvis. People were buying his records, and as many as 25,000 people showed up to the funeral site to pay their respects. Many fans said they were family, and this speaks volumes of who Elvis was and just how much he meant to his fans. People might not have realized just how much of an impact he had until he was gone.